September 1952, Mid-Atlantic. Charlie Chaplin stands on the deck of the RMS Queen Elizabeth, salt air in his face, sailing toward England for the premiere of his new film, Limelight. He's 63 years old, the most famous comedian in the world, a legend who built Hollywood with his bare hands. And then a crew member approaches. There's a cable, urgent, from Washington. Chaplin opens it. The words hit like a gunshot. The United States Attorney General has revoked his re-entry permit. He is not allowed back into America. Not temporarily. Not until further notice. Banned. Exiled. A man who lived in the country for 40 years, who made fortunes for American studios, who defined American cinema, is now considered too dangerous to return. The headlines scream it the next day. Chaplin barred from U.S. America shuts door on Red Clown. Communist sympathizer exiled. And across the country, millions of Americans who once loved the little tramp nod in agreement. Good riddance. He had it coming. He's a communist anyway. But here's the question nobody asked. Was he? The answer is no. Charlie Chaplin was never a member of the Communist Party. The FBI knew it. The government knew it. Even the press knew it. But by 1952, it didn't matter. Because America didn't exile Charlie Chaplin for being a communist. America exiled him for refusing to hate communists on command. And that refusal, in Cold War America, was the only sin that mattered. This is the story of how a rumor destroyed a reputation, how newspapers, veterans groups, church leaders, and politicians turned the greatest comedian in history into public enemy number one. Not because of what he did, but because of what he wouldn't do. Neil. It starts in 1940, before the Red Scare, before McCarthy, before loyalty oaths and blacklists, and the terror that would consume Hollywood. Charlie Chaplin releases The Great Dictator. It's a comedy, a satire, a film where Chaplin plays a Jewish barber who gets mistaken for a Hitler-like dictator named Adenoid Hinkle. He mocks fascism. He mocks war. He mocks the men who send millions to die for power and greed. And at the end, Chaplin breaks character and delivers a speech directly to the camera, a plea for humanity, for peace, for a world without hatred. America loves it. Critics praise it. Audiences cheer. Because in 1940, hating Hitler is patriotic. Mocking fascism is heroic. And Chaplin is a hero. But Chaplin doesn't stop there. In 1942, the United States and the Soviet Union are allies, fighting together against Nazi Germany. Supporting Russia is not just acceptable. It's encouraged. War bonds, relief funds, propaganda films showing brave Soviet soldiers defending Stalingrad. Hollywood churns out pro-Soviet content because the government asks them to. On December 3rd, 1942, Chaplin attends a Russian war relief dinner in New York. He gives a speech. And in that speech, trying to show solidarity with an American ally, he says the line that will haunt him for the rest of his life. I am not a communist, but I am proud to say that I feel pretty pro-communist. The crowd applauds. At that moment, in that room, supporting the Soviets means supporting the war effort. It means standing against Hitler. But Chaplin doesn't realize he's just handed his enemies a loaded gun. A single sentence they'll fire at him 1,000 times. A quote that will be stripped of context, reprinted in every smear piece, used as proof that Charlie Chaplin is a Red, and J. Edgar Hoover is listening. The FBI starts building a file. Not because Chaplin is a spy, not because he's passing secrets or organizing cells, but because he's influential, because he's political, because he supports causes the government doesn't like. Civil rights groups, labor unions, anti-fascist organizations, left-leaning artists like composer Hans Eisler, who will later be deported as a communist. Chaplin's name appears in reports. His speeches are monitored. His associations are cataloged, and quietly, without trial or charges, the FBI labels him suspicious. But the file stays private. The surveillance stays secret. What destroys Chaplin isn't the government, it's the press. The war ends. The Cold War begins. And everything changes. Overnight, the Soviet Union flips from heroic ally to existential enemy. The same politicians who praised Stalin now call him a monster. The same studios that made pro-Soviet films now scramble to prove their loyalty. And Hollywood, the dream factory, becomes a battlefield. In 1947, the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, comes to Hollywood. They want names. They want confessions. They want actors, writers, directors, and producers to stand up, point fingers, and denounce communists in the industry. Some cooperate. Ronald Reagan testifies. Walt Disney testifies. They name names. They prove their loyalty. They survive. But Chaplin refuses to play. HUAC subpoenas him, or at least they threaten to. Chaplin sends a letter, a telegram. He makes his position clear. I am not a communist. Neither have I ever joined any political party or organization in my life. That should be enough. It's the truth. But then Chaplin adds the part that seals his fate. He refuses to publicly denounce communists. He refuses to join the ritual of hatred. He calls himself a peacemonger. He criticizes HUAC as dishonest. He won't fall in line. And in 1947, America, that's the same as guilt. On November 17th, 1947, the Screen Actors Guild adopts an anti-communist loyalty oath for its officers. If you want power in Hollywood, you sign a statement swearing you're not a communist. Studios release the Waldorf Statement, promising never to employ anyone with communist ties. The Hollywood 10, writers and directors who refuse to testify, are blacklisted. Careers end. Families are destroyed. Fear becomes the currency of survival. And Charlie Chaplin, the biggest name in the industry, won't sign, won't swear, won't kneel. He's not blacklisted. Not officially. He's too famous for that. But he becomes something worse. A symbol. The man who got rich in America but won't become a citizen. The foreigner who criticizes American values. The artist who thinks he's above loyalty oaths. And the press tears him apart. Westbrook Pegler, a columnist for the Hearst newspapers, leads the charge. He's been attacking Chaplin since the early 1940s, blending moral panic with political suspicion. Chaplin's relationships with younger women, his multiple marriages, his refusal to take American citizenship. Pegler packages it all together. A degenerate foreign radical corrupting American values. Un-American. Immoral. Dangerous. The American Legion joins in. National Commander James F. O'Neill denounces Chaplin as part of the communist threat. The American Legion magazine runs a long piece by Victor Lasky, listing Chaplin's so-called subversive acts, his speeches, his associations, his films. The FBI keeps a card with his name on it, labeled Alien Communist, a list of people to be detained in case of national emergency. Catholic groups organize. Veterans groups organize. Conservative churches organize. And they all have one target: Charlie Chaplin. In 1947, Chaplin releases Monsieur Verdoux. It's a dark comedy about a man who marries and murders rich widows to support his family during the Depression. It's a satire, a critique of capitalism and war. Chaplin's character compares his crimes to the violence of modern business and the mass murder of war. He's making a point. Murder for profit isn't new. We just call it different names depending on who does it. Critics on the left praise it. Critics on the right call it communist propaganda. And the American Legion calls for boycotts. Picket lines form outside theaters. Signs read, "Boycott Red Chaplin." Veterans stand at the doors, handing out flyers. Church groups warn their congregations. The film that European critics hail as a masterpiece dies at the American box office. Not because it's bad, but because half the country has been told that watching it is unpatriotic. Chaplin watches his audience abandon him. The same people who laughed at the tramp, who cried at city lights, who cheered for the great dictator, now turn their backs. Because they've been told he's a communist. And in Cold War America, that's all they need to hear. It doesn't matter that there's no evidence. It doesn't matter that the FBI file, for all its surveillance, never finds proof he joined the party. It doesn't matter that Chaplin says, over and over, I am not a communist, because he also says, I won't hate them just because you tell me to. And that second part is the crime. Studios become afraid to work with him. Distributors won't touch his films. The press frames every story the same way. Foreign, radical, immoral, red. The rumor becomes accepted truth, not because it's true, but because repeating it is safer than defending him. And Chaplin, the man who built an empire on silence, watches his reputation collapse in noise. By 1952, he knows it's over. He's made Limelight, a film about an aging performer watching the world move on without him. It's personal, it's raw, and he knows the American audience won't come. So he sails to Europe for the premiere. A tour, a break, maybe a goodbye. And then, mid-Atlantic, the cable arrives. The United States Attorney General has revoked his re-entry permit, citing moral and political concerns. Chaplin is banned from returning, not arrested, not charged, just erased, exiled by bureaucratic decree. The press celebrates. America finally rids itself of communist clown. The same columnists who spent a decade smearing him declare victory. The same veterans groups who picketed his films call it justice. And across the country, millions of Americans who once loved Charlie Chaplin believe the lie. He was a communist all along. We were right to turn on him. But Chaplin knows the truth, and years later, in his autobiography, he writes it down. My prodigious sin was, and still is, being a nonconformist. Although I am not a communist, I refuse to fall in line by hating them. I was opposed to the Committee on Un-American Activities, a dishonest phrase to begin with. That's the answer. He wasn't exiled for being a communist. He was exiled for refusing to perform hatred on schedule, for refusing to kneel when everyone else knelt, for believing that loyalty to a country didn't mean blind obedience to its worst instincts. The rumor didn't destroy Charlie Chaplin because it was true. It destroyed him because America wanted it to be true. Because a nation gripped by fear needed villains. And a British comedian who mocked power, criticized war, and refused to hate on command made the perfect target. Chaplin never returned to the United States. He settled in Switzerland. He kept making films. He lived another 25 years. And in 1972, when the Red Scare had finally burned itself out, Hollywood invited him back for one night. An honorary Oscar, a standing ovation, the industry that exiled him now pretending they'd loved him all along. But the damage was done. A generation of Americans grew up believing Charlie Chaplin was a communist, not because he was, but because a rumor, repeated loud enough and long enough, becomes history. And sometimes history forgets to check if the rumor was ever true.